Hey guys, in this lecture we're going to be covering some of the leading terms you're going to hear working in the industry, as well as throughout this series of videos that we're putting together, all surrounding typography. So as you can tell in this document I have open right now, we're going to begin discussing kerning, tracking, as well as leading, and then after those three terms I want to go ahead and discuss a few things you're only going to hear when working within bodies of text or paragraphs. So let's just jump right into it here. Let's start with kerning. Now, kerning is really one of the more important terms that we're going to be discussing in this video. It is really the final touch that you're going to want to put on a document before you consider it finished. And really, it's all about legibility. When you first type out a word in a given program like InDesign, like I have open right now, or if you're using Photoshop or Illustrator, sometimes there are just going to be a little bit too much space in certain areas, or vice versa, there's going to be a little bit too little of space. So it's going to be a really important step that you take as a designer to just look at what you have written in front of you and make that conscious, best guess decision of where you're going to want to make these kerning adjustments to have that word just be read the most natural way possible. So the actual textbook definition of kerning is written right underneath the word. Basically, it is the process of adjusting the space between characters, usually to achieve a visually pleasing result. And that's kind of the key there, that last sentence, usually to achieve a visually pleasing result. Because like I was saying, there really isn't much of a science to adjusting kerning. It's all just about you as a designer making the best decision of where there's a little bit too much or too little of space. So looking at the word I have written out here, personally, I feel that there is just too much space in between the K and the E in this word. If this was the title of my document, that would not fly as the final production piece. It almost just wants to be pronounced K-earning at this point, and that is the exact opposite of what we want this to look like. So in this circumstance, I'm going to want to decrease the kerning between the K and the E. So I select the space between those two characters, and if I decrease the kerning, you're going to see that gap become more narrow as I continue to decrease it. And just as adversely, if I wanted to go ahead and increase that space for whatever reason, I'm going to go ahead and make that gap more obvious. I'm going to go ahead and increase the space of that kerning. But just to leave this where it looks appropriate. There we go. That looks much more natural to me. I would consider that well-spaced, well-kerned word. So let's go ahead and take a look at kerning in action. Some real-world examples of kerning, both gone wrong as well as well-adjusted kerning, and how powerful of an impact it can have on your design work, and really how important it is just to pay attention to this small little step of adjustment. I mean, you saw how quick that was for me to adjust the space between that K and the E. It took me like 10 seconds. So don't overlook this step. It really is important in your finished design work. So here are a few examples of kerning in actual production and where it's both gone wrong and where it's actually done really well. If you haven't figured it out already, this is definitely one of our bad examples of kerning. So this box is supposed to say 10 flickering lights. I actually find it's pretty difficult to actually figure out what that's trying to say, but it is trying to say flickering. Obviously, there's just too little of space between that L and the I. That word has totally changed its meaning now. That box is pulled off the shelves, and the person who made that box is fired, looking for work. And it's going to be really hard for them to find work with that as a piece in their portfolio and their design history. So don't become that person. You just saw, once again, how quick and easy it was for me to adjust that kerning. Don't overlook these small little details because they make a huge impact in the long run. So here's another example. Basically the exact opposite of what we were just looking at there. Just too much space in between the A and the V in this circumstance of savings. It almost wants to be mispronounced at this point. And if this is a bank that I'm supposed to be trusting my money with, if they don't even have enough common sense to just look at the spacing in between their signage out front of their building, there is no way I'm actually going to be trusting them with my hard-earned money. That is not going to happen. And once again, you do not want this to be a product of your hard work. So, just a couple examples of kerning gone wrong. This does happen in the actual world. This slips through production. So don't even allow this to be a potential problem in your design work. Just look at your kerning, make those fine-tuned adjustments. Now, here's actually a really good example of kerning, for my personal preference at least. This is a general store that I have been doing some work for, and this was their already existing logo that they handed it over to me to work with. And personally, I find that it's just a really well put together example of well kerned words. You know, the space seems very much even throughout, the distribution is spot on, and I believe this typeface is Rockwell that they're working with on this sign. And just knowing Rockwell, working with it firsthand, I know it does not kern this well right out of the box naturally. If you just typed this out in Photoshop, it would not look this good. So I know the designer had to do some manual kerning adjustments, and I feel like that really paid off for them in the long run, because overall this looks like a really clean, very simple, but also very well put together sign. So that was kerning.